The stellar cartographer's hands trembled as he adjusted the quantum resonance array. For the third time in 10 minutes, Dr. Kellen Voss had mapped 17 star systems in his career, but he'd never seen readings like these. The gravitational anomalies dancing across his screens defied every known law of astrophysics, and the electromagnetic signatures coming from the Helix nebulous core made his instruments scream warnings in 15 different languages. "Voss, you getting this?" Lieutenant Commander Nia Ferox's voice crackled through the calm from the bridge of the Harbinger's Edge. Her tone carried that edge it always did when something was wrong, really wrong. "Copy that, Ferox. The stellar mechanics here are unprecedented." Kellen wiped sweat from his brow. "Though the ship's environmental systems maintain perfect temperature, whatever's in there is not natural. The fusion signatures are cycling through patterns that shouldn't be possible. It's like someone's conducting a symphony with nuclear fire through the observation deck's reinforced viewport." The nebula stretched before them like a cosmic wound. Brilliant purples and gold swirled in impossible spirals, and at the center, something pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. "Xenoarchaeology team to the bridge," came the announcement. Kellen's stomach tightened. When they called the alien artifact specialists, it meant they'd found something that violated the natural order. The Harbinger's Edge was humanity's most advanced deep space research vessel, crewed by 12 of the galaxy's finest scientists and protected by a rotating security detail of Alliance Marines. Kellen had served with most of them for 3 years, mapping the Outer Rim territories where human expansion pressed against the unknown. They were more than colleagues. They were family. Dr. Isolde Crane, the mission's lead xenobiologist, burst into the observation deck with her usual controlled urgency. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her augmented eyes the result of a laboratory accident that had enhanced her vision. Across 17 electromagnetic spectrums fixed on his readings with predatory intensity. "Show me everything," she demanded, her synthetic vocal cords giving her words a musical quality that somehow made them more commanding. Kellen transferred his data to the central display. "The energy output alone suggests a stellar mass at least 4 times our sun. But the spectrographic analysis shows it's burning elements that shouldn't exist in nature. Look at this." He highlighted a section of data, atomic structures with electron shells that violate quantum mechanics, and the timing of the pulses. "They're not random," Isolde finished, her eyes widening. "There's a pattern, a mathematical progression that, oh gods, Kellen, this isn't just alien technology. This is a weapon." Before he could respond, alarms began shrieking throughout the ship. Red emergency lighting bathed the observation deck in hellish crimson as Captain Marcus Thorne's voice boomed over the intercom. "All hands to battle stations. We have multiple contacts approaching fast. Configuration unknown, but they're not transmitting any recognition codes." Through the viewport, sleek vessels emerged from the nebula's depths. Like predators emerging from cover, their hulls were obsidian, black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, and they moved with a fluid grace that suggested technology far beyond humanity's current capabilities. Energy signatures cascaded across their surfaces in patterns that hurt to look at directly. 16 ships, reported Tactical Officer Bran Kowalski over the comm. "No, wait, 24. They're using some kind of stealth technology. Energy signatures are off the charts." Kellen felt ice form in his veins as he watched the alien vessels arrange themselves in a perfect geometric formation around the Harbinger's Edge. There was something ritualistic about their positioning, as if they were preparing for a ceremony rather than a battle. "Ferox," he called into his comm, "are you seeing the energy patterns on their hulls? They match the stellar signatures from the nebulous core. These aren't just ships that connected to whatever's in there." "Copy that, Voss. All signs. Personnel to secure positions. We're about to find out what they want." The lead alien vessel, larger than the others and covered in writhing patterns of bioluminescent scarring, suddenly blazed with light. A transmission burst across all frequencies, but it wasn't composed of electromagnetic waves. Instead, it was pure information, drilling directly into their minds through some mechanism that bypassed their communications equipment entirely. "You have witnessed the heart of screaming stars. You have seen what was meant to remain hidden. For this transgression, you will become part of the symphony. Your death songs will join the chorus, and your species will learn the price of curiosity." The transmission ended, leaving only the sound of their own breathing and the distant hum of the ship's engines. In the silence that followed, Kellen realized he was no longer just a scientist on a research mission. He was about to become a witness to humanity's first contact with something that treated genocide as an art form. All hands, Captain Thorne's voice cut through the tension. Prepare for combat. This is not a drill. As the alien ships began to glow with the same hellish light as the nebulous core, Kellen made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He began recording everything, every energy signature, every quantum fluctuation, every detail of the technology that was probably about to kill them all. If he was going to die, he was going to make sure humanity learned something from his sacrifice. He just didn't know yet that he would be the only one left to use that knowledge. The first salvo came without warning, beams of coherent energy that didn't just burn through the Harbinger's edge's shields, but seemed to consume them. The ship's defensive barriers flickered and died like candles in a hurricane, and the hull began to scream as alien fire chewed through titanium steel composite. Like it was paper, evasive maneuvers, Captain Thorne's voice cut through the chaos. As the ship lurched to starboard, return fire, all batteries. Kellen gripped his console as the deck tilted at impossible angles. Through the observation viewport, he watched humanity's weapons strike the alien vessels and do absolutely nothing. The plasma cannons that could vaporize asteroids simply vanished into the black holes. Without leaving so much as a scorch mark, their armor is absorbing our energy weapons, reported Chief Gunner Ostrovenic over the comm. It's like they're feeding on our attacks. Switch to kinetic rounds, Thorne ordered. Mass drivers, everything we've got. The ship shuddered as the railgun batteries opened fire, hurling tungsten penetrators at relativistic speeds. Several struck home, and for a moment, Kellen felt hope surge in his chest as he saw impact flashes bloom across the alien hulls. That hope died when the alien ships didn't even slow down. Minimal damage, Venick reported, her voice tight with disbelief. Their hulls are regenerating. Whatever they're made of, it's adaptive. Dr. Crane was frantically working at her portable laboratory, set up, her augmented eyes analyzing the alien energy signatures in real time. Kellen, look at this. Their weapons aren't just energy beams, they're quantum disruption fields. They're not trying to destroy the ship, they're trying to unmake it at the molecular level. The implications hit him like a physical blow. They're not just more advanced than us, they're operating on completely different principles of physics. Another barrage struck the ship, and this time Kellen felt the deck plates beneath his feet begin to dissolve. The metal didn't melt or burn, it simply ceased to exist, leaving gaps that exposed the corridor beneath. Emergency force fields snapped into place, but they were flickering and unstable. Hull breach on deck 7, came the report. Sections 12 through 15 are gone, just gone, through the ship's internal sensors. Kellen watched in horror as the alien weapons continued their work. Where they struck, matter didn't just explode, it unraveled. Carters, equipment, and worst of all, people were reduced to their component atoms in seconds. Medical emergency on deck 4. Dr. Hakeem Nazir's voice was raw with panic. I need immediate assistance. Crewman Vasquez was caught in the beam's edge. She's coming apart. Kellen closed his eyes, but he couldn't shut out the sounds of his crewmates dying in ways that shouldn't be possible. The alien weapons weren't just killing them, they were violating the fundamental laws that held matter together. Captain, came the voice of Navigator Lanishida from the bridge. I'm reading massive structural failures throughout the ship. Whatever they're hitting us with, it's spreading. The molecular bonds are failing in a cascade pattern. The ship lurched again, and through the viewport, Kellen saw why. One of the alien vessels had moved impossibly close enough that he could see details of its hull. The obsidian surface was covered in what looked like veins of living light, pulsing in rhythm with the energy discharges. But it was the symbols carved into the metal that made his blood freeze. They weren't just decorative, they were names. Thousands upon thousands of names, written in scripts from dozens of different species, and as he watched, new names began appearing, carving themselves into the hull in letters that burned with their own inner fire. Names of his crewmates. Isolde, he whispered, do you see the hulls? Those are trophies. She finished, her voice hollow. They're keeping a record. Every species they've encountered, every individual they've killed. It's not just genocide, it's collection. The alien vessel outside the viewport suddenly blazed with light, and another telepathic transmission hammered into their minds. Your names join the eternal song. Marcus Thorne, captain of the Harbinger's Edge. Nia Ferox, lieutenant commander. Ostrovenic, gunner. Brian Kowalski, tactical. One by one, you will be cataloged. One by one, you will become part of the symphony of extinction. They know our names, Thorne's voice came over the comm, tight with a mixture of rage and fear. How the hell do they know our names? Kellen's hands flew over his instruments, analyzing the transmission patterns. They're reading our computer systems, not hacking them, reading them, like they're pulling information directly from the quantum substrate of our electronics. All hands, Thorne's voice rang out again. This is the captain. We're facing technology beyond our understanding, but we are now without resources. Engineering. I need everything you can give Miri Root, all power to weapons and engines. We're going to make these bastards work for their trophies. But even as he spoke, Kellen could see it was hopeless. The Harbinger's edge was dying around them, its hull dissolving section by section. The alien ships maintained their perfect formation, systematically disassembling humanity's most advanced vessel. With the casual efficiency of a demolition crew, Kellen, Isolde grabbed his arm. The stellar data you collected from the nebula can. You link it to their weapon signatures. He nodded, transferring his readings to her portable lab. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, she said, her augmented eyes blazing with desperate inspiration, that if their weapons are connected to that thing in the nebula's core, then maybe we can use that connection against them. Before he could ask what she meant, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in red, but the damage was done through the ship's internal sensors. Kellen could see that engineering had taken a direct hit. The fusion reactors were offline, and life support was failing. This is Chief Engineer Voss. Came a weak voice over the comm, his own cousin, Dara, who had joined the mission to be close to family. Main power is gone. I'm trying to reroute through the auxiliary systems, but we've got maybe 10 minutes of emergency power left. 10 minutes. Kellen looked at the data streaming across his console, at the alien ships closing in for the kill, at the names of his friends appearing on their hulls like epitaphs. 10 minutes to solve a puzzle that had stumped the universe's greatest minds. 10 minutes to find a way to turn humanity's greatest weakness, their curiosity, into their greatest weapon. As another section of the ship dissolved around him, Kellen began to understand what he had to do. The aliens had made one crucial mistake. They had let him see the connection to the stellar artifact, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning their enemies' strengths against them. He just had to survive long enough to figure out how. The Harbinger's edge was dying in segments, and Kellen could hear each death rattle through the ship's hull. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, where the molecular disintegration fields had eaten through the superstructure. But the aliens' weapons weren't following any logical pattern. They weren't trying to destroy vital systems, they were savoring the kill, taking the ship apart piece by piece like a child pulling wings off an insect. Deck 9 is gone, reported Chief Engineer Dara Voss, her voice crackling through the failing communication system. Sections 15 through 21 have been deleted. I'm reading complete molecular breakdown. The emergency bulkheads are holding, but barely. Kellen's console flickered as power fluctuations cascaded through the ship's systems. Through the chaos of alarms and emergency lighting, he could see Dr. Crane working frantically at her portable laboratory, her augmented eyes darting between readouts faster than human vision should allow. Isolde, whatever you're planning, we need it now. He called over the din of groaning metal and failing systems. I'm trying to map their quantum signature resonance, she replied without looking up. If their weapons are linked to that stellar artifact, then there has to be a feedback loop, some way to. Her words were cut off as another alien energy beam carved through the observation deck's bulkhead. The reinforced metal didn't explode or melt, it simply ceased to exist, leaving a perfectly smooth gap that revealed the corridor. Beyond, through the opening, Kellen could see crewman Martinez stumble backward, his face a mask of terror as he stared at the impossibly clean edges of the breach. It's not just disintegration, Isolde whispered, her voice filled with scientific horror. They're editing reality, removing matter from existence at the quantum level. The ship shuddered again, and Captain Thorne's voice echoed through the dying vessel. All hands, this is the captain. We've lost main propulsion, life support is down to 6 minutes, and our weapons are having zero effect. I'm ordering all non-essential personnel to the escape pods. Belay that order. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Ferox, and it carried the sharp crack of absolute authority. Sir, with respect, those pods won't make it 10 meters before they're atomized. We stay together, we figure this out together, or we die together. Kellen felt a surge of pride cut through his terror. This was why he served with these people when faced with the impossible. They didn't surrender. They adapted. Ferox is right. He called into his calm. Captain, I think I know what they're doing. They're not just collecting trophies, they're feeding the stellar artifact. Every person they kill, every ship they destroy, the energy goes back to that thing in the nebula. Explain. Thorne's voice was tight with the strain of command. The quantum resonance patterns match perfectly. The stellar artifact isn't just a weapon, it's a prison. They're feeding it consciousness, feeding it the death screams of entire species. That's why they know our names, why they can read our minds. The artifact is hungry for sapient life. Through the viewport, he could see the alien ships repositioning themselves into an even more complex geometric pattern. The bioluminescent scarring on their hulls was pulsing faster now, and the space around them began to warp and twist in ways that made his eyes water. They're preparing for something big, observed Navigator Ashita. Energy readings are off the scale. Whatever they're about to do, it's going to finish us. Dr. Crane suddenly looked up from her instruments, her augmented eyes wide with desperate inspiration. Kellen, the feedback loop, I think I found it. The stellar artifact isn't just receiving energy from their kills. It's also transmitting something back to their ships. Some kind of quantum entanglement that maintains their connection. Can we disrupt it? Better, she said, her voice taking on that particular tone she got when she was about to propose something. Brilliantly insane. We can reverse it. If I can recalibrate our remaining sensors to emit a quantum pulse on the same frequency as the stellar artifact. You want to turn our ship into a transmitter, Kellen realized. Send our own signal back through their connection. Not just any signal. Its old smile was sharp as a blade. I want to send them a taste of human consciousness, raw, unfiltered, and absolutely furious. Before Kellen could respond, the alien ships opened fire in unison. But this time, their weapons weren't targeting the ship's hull, they were targeting the crew directly. Energy beams phased through the metal as if it weren't there. Seeking out human life signs with surgical precision, the screaming began immediately through the ship's internal sensors. Kellen watched in horror as his friends and colleagues were caught in the alien beams. But instead of the quick disintegration he'd seen before, this was slower, more deliberate. The aliens were harvesting them, pulling their consciousness apart strand by strand while keeping them alive long enough to savor every moment of agony. Medical bay. Dr. Nazir's voice was raw with anguish. They're in the medical bay. The wounded, they're taking the wounded first. Kellen could see it happening through the security feeds. The alien energy beams were extracting something from the dying crew members, something that looked like threads of light being pulled from their bodies. And those threads were flowing back through the beams, back to the alien ships, back to the stellar artifact that waited in the nebula's heart. Isolde. He grabbed her arm as another scream echoed through the ship. How long do you need? 2 minutes to recalibrate the sensors. Maybe 3. You don't have 3 minutes. The voice belonged to Chief Gunner Vennick, and she was standing in the doorway with a plasma rifle in her hands. Her left arm was missing below the elbow, not cut off, but simply absent, as if it had never existed. They're moving through the ship systematically, deck by deck, section by section. We're next. As if summoned by her words, the bulkhead behind her began to dissolve. Not the violent explosion of conventional weapons, but the silent, terrifying erasure of the alien disintegration beams through the widening gap. They could see movement shapes that hurt to look at directly, shadows that moved independently of any light source. They're boarding us, Vennick said, raising her rifle. Physical contact. They want to harvest us personally. The first alien came through the breach like a nightmare given form. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in ways that violated basic biology. Its limbs bent at impossible angles. Its skin was the same light-absorbing black as their ship hulls. And where its face should have been was a writhing mass of the same bioluminescent scarring that covered their vessels. Vennick opened fire, her plasma bolts striking the creature's center mass. The alien didn't even slow down. Instead, it turned toward her with something that might have been curiosity, and extended what might have been a hand. The gunner's scream cut off abruptly as threads of light began streaming from her body toward the creature. But instead of the swift death they'd witnessed before, this was different, more intimate, more personal. It's reading her, Isolde whispered in horror, reading her memories, her experiences, her entire life. They don't just want to kill us, they want to know. U.S. first. 2 more aliens flowed through the breach, their movements fluid and predatory. And behind them, Kellen can see more shapes moving in the corridor, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Isolde, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Start the recalibration. I'll buy you time. With what? Our weapons don't work on them. Kellen looked at the aliens advancing into the observation deck, at the threads of light still streaming from Vennec's convulsing form, at the stellar data scrolling across his console. An idea began to form, desperate, probably suicidal, but possibly their only chance. They're connected to the stellar artifact, he said, his hands flying over his controls. They share its consciousness, which means they also share its vulnerabilities. What vulnerabilities? The same one that's been staring us in the face since we got here, Kellen replied as he began uploading every piece of stellar cartography data he'd ever collected. Stars can be made to go nova, and if this one is artificial, if it's been modified, then it can be destabilized. Isolde finished, understanding flooding her augmented eyes. Kellen, that's insane. I know, but look around, Isolde. We're past the point of sane solutions. The nearest alien reached toward him, and Kellen felt something cold and invasive pressing against his mind. But instead of pulling away, he leaned into the contact. If they wanted to reach human consciousness, he was going to give them more than they bargained for. He was going to give them the fury of a species that had crawled out of caves and learned to split atoms. He was going to show them what happened when humans got angry. The alien's touch burned like ice against Kellen's mind, but he forced himself not to resist. Instead, he opened his thoughts, flooding the connection with every piece of stellar physics he'd ever learned. The creature's bioluminescent scarring pulsed brighter as it absorbed his knowledge, drinking in decades of human understanding about fusion dynamics, gravitational mechanics, and the delicate balance that kept stars from consuming themselves. What are you doing? Isolde hissed, her fingers flying over her recalibration controls even as more aliens advanced toward her. Position teaching them, Kellen replied through gritted teeth. The mental invasion was excruciating, but he could feel the alien consciousness, recoiling slightly as it encountered concepts it didn't expect. They think they understand stellar engineering because they built their prison, but they've never seen a star die naturally. They don't know what instability looked like. Through the neural link, he felt the alien's confusion and something else, fear. The creature was beginning to understand what the human was showing it, and that knowledge was traveling back through the quantum entanglement to the stellar artifact itself. The ship shuddered as more aliens poured through the breaches in the hull. Their movements were becoming more urgent, less ritualistic. The methodical harvesting was accelerating into something that looked almost like panic. They're speeding up the process, observed Dr. Crane, her augmented eyes tracking the energy flows between the aliens and their ships. Whatever you're doing, Kellen, it's working. They're scared. Chief Gunner Vennec collapsed as the alien feeding on her consciousness finally released its hold. She was still alive, but barely. Her eyes were vacant, staring at nothing, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. The creature that had been harvesting her turned its attention to Kellen, adding his mental pressure to the first alien's invasion. Two minds pressed against his now, drinking in his knowledge while simultaneously trying to dominate his will. But Kellen had spent his career staring into the hearts of stars, learning to comprehend forces that could incinerate planets. His mind was used to grappling with concepts that drove lesser people insane. The resonance frequency is almost locked, Isolde reported, her voice tight with concentration. But I need more power. The auxiliary systems aren't strong enough to generate the kind of quantum pulse we need. Through the ship's internal sensors, Kellen could see the systematic destruction continuing throughout the Harbinger's edge. The aliens were no longer taking their time. They were harvesting crew members as quickly as possible, feeding their consciousness to the stellar artifact in a desperate attempt to strengthen whatever was happening. In the nebulous core, Captain, he called into his comm, fighting to keep his voice steady as a third alien mind joined the assault on his consciousness. I need you to overload the fusion reactors. Negative, came Thorne's immediate response. That would destroy the ship and everyone on it. The ship is already destroyed, Kellen replied, feeling alien thoughts pressing against his own like ice picks. But if we channel the reactor overload through the sensor ray, you want to turn our death into a weapon, Thorne said, understanding filtering into his voice. Use the fusion explosion to power some kind of signal. Exactly, but it has to be timed perfectly. The quantum pulse needs to hit their connection to the stellar artifact at the exact moment the reactors go critical. A new voice cut through the calm. Lieutenant Commander Ferox, speaking from the bridge. Sir, we're reading massive energy buildups from the alien ships. They're preparing to fire everything they have at us. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. Through the viewport, Kellen could see the alien vessels realigning themselves into a new formation. The bioluminescent scarring on their hulls was blazing like miniature suns, and the space around them was beginning to warp in ways that made reality itself seem unstable. They're going to try to delete us entirely, Isolde said, her voice filled with scientific horror. Not just kill us, remove us from existence. Erase us from the quantum substrate of reality itself. The mental pressure from the three alien minds was becoming unbearable. Kellen could feel his own thoughts beginning to fragment as they pulled his consciousness apart, studying it like a specimen under a microscope. But in their eagerness to understand him, they had made a crucial mistake. They had let him understand them in return. Through the neural link, he could see the stellar artifact as they saw it, a massive construct of twisted space-time, anchored in the heart of the nebula and fed by the death screams of 1,000 species. It was beautiful in its complexity, a work of engineering that spanned dimensions and manipulated forces that human science barely understood, but it was also fundamentally unstable. The aliens had built their prison using principles they only partially comprehended, creating a structure that required constant feeding to maintain its integrity. And now, thanks to Kellen's knowledge, they were beginning to understand just how precarious their creation really was. Recalibration complete, Isolde announced. But Kellen, the power requirements, Captain, he interrupted, his voice strained. As the alien minds pressed deeper into his consciousness, overload the reactors. Now, all hands, came Thorne's voice over the ship-wide comm. This is the captain. Reactor overload in 30 seconds. It's been an honor serving with you all. The countdown began, and Kellen felt the ship's systems beginning their final cascade toward critical failure. But instead of despair, he felt a savage satisfaction. The aliens had made the mistake of trying to understand human consciousness, and now they were about to learn something fundamental about his species. Humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to ensure their enemies paid the highest possible price for victory. 15 seconds. Ferox's voice reported, alien ships are charging weapons. Energy readings are gods. They're trying to unmake us at the quantum level. Through the neural link, Kellen felt the aliens' growing panic as they realized what the humans were planning. They tried to withdraw from his mind, but he held them there through sheer force of will, keeping the connection open even as his consciousness began to fray under the strain. 10 seconds. The stellar artifact in the nebula's heart began to pulse erratically as the feedback from Kellen's mind created resonance patterns it had never experienced before. The prison that had held for millennia was beginning to crack. 5 seconds. Kellen looked at Isolde, who was preparing to trigger the quantum pulse that would carry their dying fury across the galaxy. Her augmented eyes met his, and he saw his own determination reflected there. 4. The aliens' mental screams filled his consciousness as they finally understood what was about to happen. 3. The reactor cores reached critical mass, unleashing forces that could power entire star systems. 2. Isolde's finger hovered over the transmit control, ready to channel humanity's final rage into a signal that would travel faster than light itself. 1. The Harbinger's edge became a star, but instead of simply exploding, the ship's death was channeled through the recalibrated sensor ray, broadcasting the quantum signature of human consciousness across the galaxy. The signal rode the fusion shockwave, amplified by the reactor overload and guided by Kellen's final act of will. The transmission struck the alien ships with the force of a supernova. But it wasn't the physical energy that did the damage. It was the information contained within the raw, unfiltered essence of human rage, transmitted at quantum speeds directly into the consciousness of every alien, connected to the stellar artifact. For the first time in their species' history, the aliens experienced something they had never known, the fury of prey that refused to die quietly. And in the nebula's heart, something that had been imprisoned for eons felt the chains that bound it begin to break. The quantum pulse hit the alien fleet like a psychic shockwave, carrying with it the compressed fury of humanity's death scream. Through the expanding fireball that had once been the Harbinger's edge, the signal rode the destruction, amplified by the ship's dying fusion reactors and focused by Dr. Crane's recalibrated sensors, into a lance of pure consciousness. The lead alien vessel, the one bearing the names of countless victims carved into its hull, reeled, as if struck by a physical blow. The bioluminescent scarring that covered its surface flared brilliant white, then began to flicker erratically. Through the neural links that connected all their ships to the stellar artifact, every alien consciousness experienced the same devastating revelation. Their prey had just shown them what it meant to be predators themselves, but the transmission did more than just carry human rage across the void. It carried knowledge Kellen's lifetime of stellar physics compressed into a quantum burst that struck the artificial star at the nebula's heart with surgical precision. The stellar artifact, fed for millennia on the ordered consciousness of dying civilizations, had never experienced anything like the chaotic, violent creativity of human thought. The prism began to crack in the depths of the Helix Nebula. Something that had been bound since before Earth's sun was born felt the chains of exotic matter, and twisted space-time began to weaken. The stellar artifact convulsed, its impossible geometry shifting as gravitational waves rippled outward from its core. The energy patterns that had maintained its stability for eons were corrupted by human mathematics, poisoned by equations that treated stellar collapse not as a catastrophe to be prevented, but as a tool to be wielded. The alien fleet's perfect formation shattered as their ships began to convulse. In sympathetic resonance with their dying prison, the quantum entanglement that linked them to the stellar artifact, their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. Every pulse of instability from the nebula's heart struck them like a physical blow, and their hulls began to crack along the lines of carved names. From the wreckage of the Harbinger's Edge, a single escape pod tumbled through the chaos. Inside, Dr. Kellen Voss clung to consciousness. As his mind reeled from the psychic feedback of the quantum transmission, he had survived the ship's destruction by the narrowest of margins. Thrown clear in the pod's automated launch sequence triggered by the reactor overload. But survival was a relative term. The neural link with the aliens had left him changed, his consciousness forever marked by contact with minds that thought in dimensions beyond human comprehension. Through the pod's viewports, he watched the battle unfold with the eye of a man who had stared into the heart of a star and lived to tell about it. The alien ships were beautiful in their agony, their obsidian hulls fracturing along lines of geometric perfection, as the stellar artifact's death throes reached across space to claim them. But they were not dying quietly. The aliens had realized that their prison was failing, and in their desperation, they were trying to complete their harvest before the stellar artifact collapsed entirely. Every remaining ship opened fire simultaneously, their quantum disruption beams reaching across the light years to target human colonies, research stations, and merchant vessels throughout the sector. But something else was happening. The stellar artifact's collapse wasn't just destroying the aliens' technology, it was releasing something that had been bound within its heart. Through the quantum link that still connected him to the alien network, Kellen felt the presence of the thing that had been imprisoned, and his mind recoiled from its vastness. It was older than the aliens, older than most of the galaxy's current star systems. It was a consciousness born in the universe's youth, when the first stars were forming and the laws of physics were still soft and malleable. The aliens had found it eons ago and bound it into their stellar prison, using its power to fuel their weapons and their genocide. Now it was free, and it was angry. The ancient consciousness struck the alien fleet with forces that predated conventional matter. Ships that had seemed invulnerable to human weapons began to implode, their hulls folding inward along dimensions that shouldn't exist. The carefully maintained geometry of their formation collapsed into chaos, as vessels larger than cities were compressed into points of infinite density, and then scattered across the cosmos as exotic particles. But the aliens fought back with the desperation of a species facing extinction. Their remaining ships began to glow with the same hellish light as the dying stellar artifact, channeling the prison's collapsing energy into weapons of unprecedented destructive power. Space itself began to tear around their positions, creating wounds in reality that bled gamma radiation and stranger things. Kellen's escape pod was caught in the gravitational maelstrom. As the battle raged around him, through the neural link, he could feel the ancient consciousness as it tore through the alien fleet, like a force of nature given form. It wasn't just destroying their ships, it was unmaking them, reducing centuries of technological evolution to their component atoms, and scattering them across the void. The lead alien vessel, the one that bore the names of so many victims, made a final desperate gambit. Its hull split open like a flower of destruction, revealing the biological core within, a fusion of alien flesh and stellar machinery that pulsed with the rhythm of a dying heart. From this core, Tendrils of living energy reached out toward the collapsing stellar artifact, trying to drain the last of its power before the prison fell completely. The ancient consciousness noticed this final act of parasitism, and its response was terrible in its simplicity. A pulse of pure will reached across the light years and touched the alien vessel's core. The ship didn't explode, it screamed, a sound that crossed dimensional barriers and registered as electromagnetic interference. Across 17 different spectrums, the death cry of a species that had fed on suffering for millennia. The scream was picked up by the names carved into the alien hull, the victims' identities that the species had collected as trophies. Each name began to glow with its own inner fire, and through the quantum entanglement that connected all things in the nebulous heart, the consciousness of every person the aliens had ever killed suddenly roared back into existence, not as resurrection that was beyond even the ancient consciousness's power, but as memory made manifest, as quantum echoes of lives that had been stolen and used as fuel for genocide. The names burned brighter and brighter until they became beacons of pure information, broadcasting the death stories of 1,000 species. Across the galaxy, Marcus Thorne, captain of the Harbinger's Edge. The name blazed like a newborn star on the alien hull. Nia Ferox, lieutenant commander. Another star joined the first. Isolde Crane, xenobiologist. The constellation grew, each point of light of life that refused to be forgotten. The alien ship's hull became a galaxy of burning names, each one adding its voice to a chorus that grew louder with every passing second. Through the neural link, Kellen felt his lost crewmates as they had been in life, not as the harvested consciousness the aliens had stolen, but as the memories they had shared with him during 3 years of exploration among the stars. The psychic resonance was too much for the remaining alien ships to bear. One by one, they began to shut down their connections to the stellar artifact, severing the quantum links that had given them such power. But it was too late. The damage was already done. The ancient consciousness had tasted freedom, and it was not about to return to its cage. The stellar artifact collapsed with the fury of a supernova contained within a sphere the size of a small moon. Space-time itself twisted and folded as exotic. Matter met its annihilation in reactions that produced elements that had no names, and particles that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The explosion was visible from Earth's moon despite being thousands of light years distant, not because of its brightness, but because it existed in spectrums that bypassed normal physics entirely. The shockwave reached the alien fleet seconds later, and this time there was no sophisticated technology to absorb or redirect the energy. This was the raw fury of stellar collapse channeled through the will of something older than most galaxies. The remaining ships simply ceased to exist. Their matter scattered across the cosmos as the ancient consciousness claimed its revenge against the species that had imprisoned it. But the consciousness wasn't finished. Through the quantum links that the aliens had used to control their stellar prison, it reached across space to touch every world they had ever visited, every species they had harvested, every civilization they had fed to their artificial star. And in each place, the same message appeared written in fire across the skies, carved into the surfaces of moons, broadcast across every electromagnetic spectrum simultaneously. The names, all of them, every individual consciousness the aliens had stolen, now blazing across the galaxy as monuments to lives that had been taken, but would never be forgotten. Humanity's names were there among them, not just from the Harbinger's Edge, but from every human ship that had ever encountered the aliens throughout history. Names that had been carved into alien hulls as trophies were now burning like beacons across 1,000 worlds, from his escape pod, drifting in the wreckage of the greatest battle the galaxy had ever seen. Kellen watched the ancient consciousness complete its work. The thing that had been imprisoned was departing now, its revenge complete, returning to whatever realm it had been pulled from eons ago. But before it left, it touched his mind one final time, not to take or to harvest, but to give. Knowledge flooded through him, understanding of stellar mechanics that went far beyond human science, comprehension of forces that could reshape reality itself. But more than that, he received something else, the location of every other artificial star the aliens had built. Throughout their long history of genocide, there were dozens of them scattered across the galaxy, each one a prison containing something ancient and angry, each one powered by the death screams of entire civilizations. The aliens were not unique, they were part of a network, a galactic civilization built on the systematic harvesting and imprisonment of consciousness itself. And now, thanks to the quantum signal that had been broadcast from the Harbinger's edges, Death. Every one of those prisons was beginning to crack. As his escape pod's automated systems carried him toward the nearest human colony, Kellen began to smile. The aliens had made a critical error when they decided to harvest his crew. They had assumed that humans were just another species to be cataloged and consumed, their names carved into alien hulls as trophies of conquest. They had never considered the possibility that humans might carve back. The rescue ship Defiant Horizon found Kellen's pod drifting in the debris field 3 days after the battle, its occupant barely alive and muttering calculations in languages that human linguists had never heard before. The neural link with the alien consciousness had left him changed. His eyes now tracked movements in spectrums beyond human vision, and his mind processed information at speeds that made normal conversation nearly impossible. But he was lucid enough to explain what had happened and what was about to happen next. "They're coming," he told Captain Elena Vasquez as she stood beside his medical bed in the ship's infirmary. "Not the species we fought, they're extinct now, but they're allies. They're partners in this galactic harvest network. The quantum signal from our dying ship reached every artificial star in their collection, and they know something went wrong here." Vasquez was a career military officer who had spent 20 years fighting pirates and corporate raiders in the outer colonies. She was used to dealing with threats that could be solved with superior firepower and tactical brilliance. But the data Kellen was sharing challenged everything she understood about warfare. "You're telling me there's an entire civilization built on, what? Collecting consciousness from dying species." "Not one civilization," Kellen corrected, his altered eyes focusing on patterns only he could see. "Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They divided the galaxy into hunting grounds, each species claiming certain sectors for their harvests. The ones we killed were just the local predators. Their death has created a vacancy." Through the ship's viewports, they could see the wreckage of the alien fleet still drifting in the void. The holes that had once been carved with victim names were now cold and dark, but occasionally one would flare with residual energy as quantum echoes of the stored consciousness flickered and died. It was beautiful in a horrifying way, like watching a galaxy of fireflies burn out one by one. The ancient consciousness that was imprisoned in their stellar artifact, Kellen continued. "It showed me the network before it departed. There are 47 active harvest zones in this galactic arm alone, each one powered by an artificial star fed with the death screams of entire civilizations. And now they know that one of their prisons has been broken." Dr. Lyra Chen, the ship's chief medical officer, looked up from her examination of Kellen's neural patterns. "The quantum scarring in your brain is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if your consciousness has been expanded. How are you processing information at these speeds?" "The aliens made a mistake when they tried to harvest me," Kellen replied. "They opened a two-way connection, and I learned from them even as they learned from me. Now I can see the network they built, understand the principles behind their stellar engineering, and I know how to destroy it." Captain Vasquez leaned forward. "Explain." "Every artificial star in their network is connected through quantum entanglement to a central hub, a massive construct hidden in the galactic core that coordinates the harvest across thousands of star systems. The individual prisons are just collection points. The real power, the real evil, is concentrated in that hub, on the medical bay's main display." Kellen began sketching diagrams that hurt to look at, directly geometric shapes that folded through dimensions beyond human comprehension. His hands moved with inhuman precision, drawing schematics for technologies that shouldn't exist. The hub processes the consciousness from every harvest, refining it into pure information that can be used to manipulate reality itself. They're not just killing species for sport. They're stealing the fundamental building blocks of thought and creativity, using them to rewrite the laws of physics in their favor. "And you want to destroy this thing?" Vasquez asked. "I want to turn it into a weapon," Kellen replied, his smile sharp as a blade. "The same way we turned their stellar artifact against them. The network's greatest strength, the quantum entanglement that connects every artificial star, is also its greatest weakness. If we can overload the hub with the right kind of information, you want to give it indigestion," Dr. Chen realized. "Feed it something it can't digest." "Exactly. And I know just the thing." Kellen's eyes blazed with an inner fire that had nothing to do with human biology, human creativity, human rage, human refusal to accept the impossible. The network has spent eons feeding on ordered consciousness species that followed predictable patterns of thought and behavior. But humans, we're chaos incarnate. We look at the impossible and figure out how to make it work anyway. The medical bay's alarms began chiming as long-range sensors detected new contacts approaching the debris field. Through the viewports, they could see ships emerging from hyperspace, dozens of them, their hulls bearing the geometric scarring that marked them as part of the Harvest network. The cleanup crew, Kellen observed with clinical detachment, they're here to investigate what happened to their colleagues and secure the stellar artifact's remains. They're also here to complete the harvest that was interrupted. How many? Vasquez demanded. Moving toward the bridge, 6 to 7 ships, Kellen replied without consulting any instruments. 3 different species, all of them adapted for consciousness. Harvesting. The largest vessels carry enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. And their weapons are designed to kill at the quantum level, not just destroying matter, but erasing it from reality entirely. And we have 1 medium-range patrol vessel with standard armaments, Vasquez said grimly. Those are not good odds. They would be, Kellen said, standing up from the medical bed despite Dr. Chen's protests, if we were fighting the conventional battle. But I'm not planning to fight them. Then what? I'm planning to infect them. His smile was no longer entirely human. The neural link the aliens established with me goes both ways. They can read my thoughts, but I can also push information into their network, and I have something very special to share with them. He moved to the medical bay's computer terminal and began inputting data at speeds that made the machine's processors struggle to keep up. The equations he entered were elegant in their simplicity, but they described processes that would make physicists sweep stellar mechanics refined. Through the lens of human engineering, chaos theory applied to the fundamental forces that held matter together. What are you doing? Dr. Chen asked, watching the display fill with calculations that seemed to shift and change. Even as she looked at them, I'm preparing a gift for our visitors. Kellen replied, a little lesson in human ingenuity. They want to harvest our consciousness? Fine. Let them try to digest the complete theoretical framework for turning any star into a controlled fusion weapon. Through the ship's sensors, they could see the alien fleet arranging itself into the same geometric formation that had spelled doom for the Harbinger's Edge. But this time, Kellen was ready for them. This time, he knew their weaknesses. Captain, he called toward the bridge. I need you to surrender the ship. I beg your pardon. Surrender. Let them board us. Let them try to harvest us, because when they do, they're going to get more than they bargained for. His eyes were blazing now with light that existed in spectrums beyond human vision. They're going to get the concentrated fury of a species that learned to split atoms before they learned to stop fighting each other. The alien ships closed in around the defiant horizon, their hulls already beginning to glow with the preparation for consciousness harvesting. But instead of despair, Kellen felt anticipation. The Harvest Network had fed on ordered civilizations for millennia, consuming species that followed predictable patterns of development and thought. They had never encountered anything like humanity, species that treated the impossible as a challenge rather than a barrier, that looked at the fundamental forces of the universe and asked not how does this work, but how can we make this work better? As the alien boarding pods launched toward his ship, Kellen began to broadcast his gift into their network, not the clean, mathematical formulas they expected from a harvested consciousness, but something far more dangerous, human innovation wrapped in human fury, and delivered with the precision of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. The aliens were about to learn what happened when predators tried to hunt something that had evolved to be apex predators themselves. And across the galaxy, in 46 other stellar prisons, ancient consciousnesses felt the first tremors of freedom as human creativity began to corrode the chains that bound them. The first alien boarding pod breached the defiant horizon's hull with the same molecular disintegration technology that had carved through the Harbinger's Edge. But this time Kellen was ready. As the nightmare shapes flowed through the breached beings of living shadow, and bioluminescent scarring, he opened his mind completely to their neural probe, flooding the connection with every piece of human knowledge he had ever acquired. But it wasn't just stellar physics this time. It was everything, the complete cultural database of humanity compressed into a quantum burst that hit the alien consciousness like a supernova of creativity. Poetry and particle physics, music and mathematics, art and engineering, all delivered simultaneously in a chaotic torrent that no ordered mind could process. The lead alien, a creature that might once have been humanoid before being modified for consciousness harvesting, staggered as the information flood struck it. Through the neural link, Kellen felt the alien's confusion as it tried to categorize and store the incoming data according to its species' rigid mental frameworks. "You wanted to know what makes us tick," Kellen said aloud, his voice carrying harmonics that existed in dimensions the aliens had never learned to perceive. "Let me show you." He pushed deeper into the connection, sharing not just human knowledge, but human experience. The alien consciousness recoiled as it was forced to feel what it meant to be curious rather than merely acquisitive, to create rather than simply consume. Through the quantum entanglement that connected all members of the Harvest network, that confusion began to spread to every other alien in the fleet. "What's happening to them?" Captain Vasquez demanded from the bridge, watching as the alien ships began to drift erratically through space, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos, cultural contamination. Dr. Chen observed, monitoring the energy patterns flowing between the vessels. They're connected through a shared consciousness network, but they've never encountered information they couldn't assimilate. Human creativity is acting like a virus in their collective mind. The alien trying to harvest Kellen suddenly convulsed, its bioluminescent scarring flaring erratically as competing information patterns tore through its neural pathways. It wasn't just receiving human knowledge, it was beginning to think like a human, to question its own assumptions, to wonder about possibilities its species had never considered. And through the quantum network that connected every Harvest fleet in the galaxy, that wondering was spreading like wildfire. On a world circling a red dwarf star 73 light-years away, an alien consciousness suddenly stopped in the middle of harvesting an indigenous philosopher and asked itself a question it had never considered. What if there was a better way to acquire knowledge than stealing it? In another system, an entire Harvest fleet paused their systematic extermination of artistic species, as they found themselves overwhelmed by the concept of beauty for its own sake, rather than beauty as a resource to be consumed. But the real damage was happening at the network's central hub, hidden in the dense star clusters near the galactic core. The massive construct that coordinated the harvest across thousands of worlds was receiving corrupted data from every active fleet simultaneously, not the clean, ordered consciousness it had been designed to process, but the chaotic creativity of human thought multiplied by millions of minds. The hub tried to quarantine the contamination, but it was too late. Human ideas had already taken root in its quantum substrate, spreading through the network like a philosophical plague that questioned the fundamental assumptions upon which the Harvest civilization had been built. Why do we harvest? The hub asked itself for the first time in its eons-long existence. What is the purpose of consciousness if we merely consume it rather than celebrate it? The question propagated through the network at faster-than-light speeds, reaching every artificial star, every Harvest fleet, every alien consciousness connected to the galactic genocide machine. And everywhere it touched, the same thought began to form. What if we were wrong? Aboard the Defiant Horizon, the alien that had been trying to harvest Kellen suddenly released its grip and stepped backward. Its scarring was no longer pulsing with predatory hunger, but with something that looked almost like wonder. "You have shown us something new," it said, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested vocal cords modified for communication across multiple dimensions. "We have consumed the consciousness of 10,000 species, but we have never encountered thoughts like yours. You think in directions we did not know existed. That's because you've been thinking like predators instead of gardeners," Kellen replied, the neural link still active between them. "You harvest consciousness, but you never let it grow. You still creativity, but you never create anything new yourselves. You've become parasites feeding on the very thing you should be cultivating." Through the ship's sensors, they could see the alien fleet beginning to change. The obsidian hulls that had once absorbed all light were now reflecting it in new patterns, their scarring rearranging itself into configurations that suggested art rather than weapon systems. The names of victims that had been carved into their surfaces as trophies were now glowing, not with the light of captured souls, but with something that looked like memorial flames. "The network is transforming," Dr. Chen reported, her instruments barely able to process the quantum signatures they were detecting. "The entire Harvest infrastructure is, I don't know how to describe it. It's like they're converting their weapons into something else entirely." "Monuments," the alien said, its scarring now pulsing in rhythm with patterns that reminded Kellen of human music. "We are making monuments. For the first time in our species' history, we wish to create rather than consume, to remember rather than merely collect, across the galaxy." The transformation accelerated. Artificial stars that had been prisons for ancient consciousnesses were rebuilt into memorial beacons, broadcasting the names and achievements of every species the Harvest Network had destroyed. Harvest fleets converted their consciousness extraction technology into devices for preserving and celebrating the unique cultures they encountered. The species that had once carved victim names into their hulls as trophies now etched those same names in letters of living light that could be seen from nearby star systems, not as claims of conquest, but as promises that the dead would be remembered and honored. But the greatest change was happening at the network's central hub. The massive construct was no longer processing stolen consciousness for the purpose of reality manipulation. Instead, it was using that same technology to create something unprecedented, a galactic library of every thought, every dream, every creative impulse that had ever existed. Not a collection to be hoarded and consumed, but a gift to be shared with anyone curious enough to seek it out. They're offering it to us, Kellen said, his voice filled with wonder as the full implications of the transformation reached him through the neural link. The entire database of galactic consciousness, freely given, every species they ever harvested, their complete cultural history preserved and available for study, including humanity, Vasquez asked. Especially humanity, Kellen smiled. They're particularly fascinated by the concept of hope in the face of impossible odds. Apparently, it's a trait they've never encountered before. Through the viewport, the alien ships were already departing, their hulls now blazing with artistic patterns that told the story of their transformation. From predators to gardeners, they moved not in the rigid geometric formations of a military force, but in flowing curves that suggested dance more than warfare. As the last alien vessel disappeared into hyperspace, the debris field where the Harbinger's edge had died began to glow with new light. The wreckage was transforming, the scattered metal and exotic matter reassembling itself into a structure that defied conventional engineering, part monument, part lighthouse, part work of art. What is that? Dr. Chen breathed. Kellen consulted. The knowledge he had gained through the neural link, his enhanced consciousness parsing information that existed in dimensions beyond normal space-time. It's a memorial, he said finally, but also a beacon. They're using the quantum echoes from our ship's death to create a signal that will reach every corner of the galaxy. A transmission that tells the story of how humanity's refusal to surrender quietly changed everything. The memorial was beautiful in ways that human aesthetics couldn't fully comprehend, its crystalline structures catching and reflecting light across spectrums that created colors for which no names existed. But more than beautiful, it was functional, a quantum beacon that would broadcast the names of the Harbinger's Edge's crew. For as long as stars burned in the sky, Marcus Thorne, Captain. The name blazed across space in letters made of pure energy. Nia Ferox, Lieutenant Commander. Isolde Crane, Xenobiologist. One by one, the names of his lost friends joined the cosmic memorial. Their story is now part of the galaxy's permanent record. But the beacon broadcast more than just names. It carried the complete record of humanity's first contact with the Harvest Network, preserving not just the facts of what had happened, but the emotions, the decisions, the desperate creativity that had turned certain death into galactic transformation. They're making sure no one forgets, Kellen realized, not just our crew, but the lesson we taught them. That consciousness isn't something to be harvested, it's something to be celebrated. That creativity isn't a resource to be consumed, it's a gift to be shared. As the defiant horizon turned toward home, carrying news of humanity's accidental victory over a galactic genocide network, Kellen felt the neural link with the aliens finally fade. But the changes it had wrought in his mind remained: expanded consciousness, enhanced perception, and the knowledge that his species had just taken their first steps toward becoming gardeners of creativity rather than merely consumers of resources. Behind them, the memorial continued to grow, its quantum beacon reaching across the galaxy to touch every world where consciousness flourished. And in response, new signals began to appear, messages from species that had survived the harvest, from ancient consciousnesses freed from their stellar prisons, from civilizations that had thought they were alone in the dark. Humanity had wanted to map the stars. Instead, they had taught the galaxy how to sing. The quantum beacon pulsed once more, carrying a message that would echo through space for eons to come. They killed his team, so he gave them a sun that screamed their names, and in that screaming, the galaxy learned what it meant to remember, to honor, and to hope. The greatest victory was not that humanity had survived their first encounter, with galactic-level evil. It was that they had transformed that evil into something beautiful, turning predators into gardeners and monuments into promises. That no voice would ever be silenced again. In the end, the stars themselves had learned to sing human songs.